Gabbard. The reasons why I stand with Tulsi are numerous and would take more time than I have to introduce her. So I'll start with what first drew me to Tulsi in 2016 when I learned she was stepping down from her vice chair position at the DNC in the midst of a presidential primary. Tulsi, giving up this position of power and visibility, showed me her integrity, conviction, and backbone. Any politician that was willing to put their career on the line and stand up to the DNC and Hillary Clinton was a candidate I knew was fighting for the voters and our democracy while demonstrating deep morals and courage. Her compassion, thank you. That's you, Tulsi. Her compassion, empathy, commitment to work for all citizens, and her creed, service above self, which she demonstrates by her love for others, her community, and her country, are the reasons why I volunteered for Tulsi in January 2019. Tulsi is currently serving her 4th term in Congress. She is a member of the Homeland Security, Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and Financial Services committees. She has introduced and successfully passed many bills with bipartisan support. Congresswoman Gabbard is also a major in the Army National Guard and has served for 16 years, deploying twice to the Middle East. Tulsi's personal qualities, her skill set, experiences, and temperament are what makes her uniquely qualified to be our next president. Someone who will always think about what is best for all of us, regardless of the political backlash, is who I want leading our country. I would like to introduce a truly remarkable person and candidate for president, Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you. Please give Susan a round of applause. Thank you for your kind introduction. Thanks for the many, many, many hours you have put into volunteering for our campaign. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here this evening. Charlie, I want to ask you to stand up. This is your house that we are in here in the VFW. Charlie's the quartermaster of this VFW. Thank you so much, and thank you for your service. Thank you. Thank you. I am so grateful to be a lifetime member of the VFW and to know that anywhere in the country, as with all veterans, to know we have a home. We have a home here in the VFW, so thank you very much. All right, I'm going to dive right in. We're on a tight schedule today, and I want to be able to get to as many questions as we can. I want to start with, Susan kind of went over a little bit about my background and experience, and I want to focus first on, it's the issue that I get asked most often about, and to me it's the thing that's top of mind and central to all of the other challenges and solutions that we see here. People ask me every day, how do we heal the divides in this country? That we are so deeply torn apart. In Washington, yes, the hyper-partisanship, one side versus the other, it's us versus them. It's about one party winning or the other party trying to beat them. And the idea of the American people actually being the ones who are winning is lost in the process. As a result, it's we the people who lose. It's we the people who see inaction and paralysis and gridlock in Washington, rather than actions that lead to solving the everyday problems that we face. This is so important to focus on so that we can actually solve problems. And because as New Hampshire voters, you got to figure out who you want to vote for in the next few days. And there's a lot of different plans, there's a lot of different ideas coming from all of the different candidates about how each of us would solve these problems. But the reality is that unless we have a president who's able to reach across the aisle, to work with members of Congress, both from the other party, but also with members of Congress, even within our own political party, we're not going to be able to get anything done. All of those plans really will only be worth the paper that they're printed on. And what we, the people, as voters, will be left with is a perpetuation of challenges and problems that we've seen go on and on and on. Being able to approach solving these problems with a very practical and realistic view is essential. And this is what it comes down to, is how do we bridge this divide? How do we get to a place where we can have leaders in this country who are actually putting service above self, who are putting country first, checking that partisanship at the door? This is what voters in this country deserve. This is the leadership that I seek to bring. And you can have the confidence to know that this isn't just some fancy, rhetorical, beautiful, utopian thought. This is rooted in reality. In 2012, when I was elected to Congress first, there were 84 of us new members elected at the same time. There were 50 Democrats, 34 Republicans. But when we got elected, we were elected into a very strong Republican majority. And so for the first week or two that we were there, we were all bussed around from one briefing to the next, getting to know each other, getting briefings on ethics and where all the buildings were and where the committee rooms were, and getting keys and ID cards, all the basic logistical things. But through this process, we really got to know each other as people. We got to know each other's families. We got to talking about where you came from and what was the experience you had and how was your campaign? Was it challenging? Just got to know each other as people without being stuffed into these partisan boxes. But then after that initial orientation period was over, then immediately the partisan divide began, where, as Democrats, we went off and immediately started having meetings in one place. Republicans went and had their meetings in the other rooms. And that's how it was from that point on. And the messaging that came from each of our respective party leaders was, all right, you're part of this team. When our legislation is going forward, we're all going to stand together. We're going to push for the Democratic legislation, and vice versa for Republicans. Even being told, hey, we don't really want you to work with this Republican because we want to take him out in the next election. And if you're able to successfully get something done, you'll help them get reelected because they'll be able to cite that accomplishment in their brochure. Same thing on the other side. Putting partisanship ahead of actually solving problems. And so this was pretty disturbing to me immediately. I knew it was very partisan, but to be so blatant and out front from the get-go, I saw how this culture was standing in the way of real progress. Immediately, I started thinking about how could I, as a newly elected Democrat from a small state in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, break through? How could I build relationships? How could I start to bridge this divide? And so I kind of went to a very basic place and thought of the most universal gesture, language, that speaks loud and clearly to me, and that is food. I called my mother in Hawaii, asked if she would make 434 boxes of her amazing macadamia nut toffee. No big deal. Not pieces, boxes. She said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. I was like, awesome, thank you. Because I have one more question. I have one more favor to ask. I asked if she would make another 435 larger boxes of toffee for the staff of every member of Congress. She paused, took a breath. She said, okay, that'll take me a little longer, but I'm in. And I thanked her profusely. She immediately got to work in Hawaii. She's stirring 2 pots of toffee on the stove at the same time. She's chopping the macadamia nuts, starting to pour the toffee. My dad called me and wanted to make sure that I knew he was helping. And he said, honey, I want you to know, I'm tasting 1 piece out of every pan of toffee that your mom makes, just to make sure it's good. I said, okay, Dad, thank you. Good job. But as they were doing this in Hawaii, I was in DC, and I just started handwriting personal notes, introducing myself to every one of my new colleagues, telling them a little bit about my background, and signing every note saying, I look forward to serving with you. We started to deliver these, what I called little gifts of aloha, and very quickly started getting responses. That during every day on the House floor, we have either 1 or 2 or 3 voting sessions. And I started to see, while we were having votes, the only time all 435 members are in the same place at the same time, there were senior ranking Republicans, chairmen of powerful committees, people from other parts of the country who normally I wouldn't cross paths with. They probably would not give me the time of day or return my call if I asked for a meeting. But they were coming and looking for me just to say thank you. Many of them following that up with, I ate it all and I need more before I can go home and see my family this weekend. Can you hook me up? But then most importantly, saying, tell me what issues your constituents are worried about. You know, what are the things that you want to work on now that you're here in Congress? I'm the chair of this committee, or I've been working on that issue, or this is an area that I've been focused on. Let's work together. I want to help. That very simple gesture, setting all politics aside, no preconditions, no purity tests, no saying, well, hey, I know I've seen you on TV and I strongly disagree with you on that, so I know I'm going to ignore you. No toffee for you. No, not you. No preconditions, reaching out to every single person, every member of Congress with respect, recognizing that even as we may have strong disagreements, and with many of them it's true, strong disagreements on certain issues, the reality is that every single one of us was elected with the same mission, the same purpose, the same promise that we made to every voter in our district. We are here to serve you. We are here to serve you, the people of this country. And building this foundation, building this relationship based on this foundation of respect as fellow Americans, rooted in the bedrock of our Constitution, allowed me as a freshman Democrat member elected from this small state in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to be able to break through these partisan barriers, to actually be able to get legislation passed. My very first bill that I introduced as a member of Congress, the Helping Heroes Fly Act, passed into law, signed by President Obama in a record period of time. It enabled me to, when other pieces of legislation were coming to the floor, I had controversial amendments that people told me were dead on arrival, that they would never get support from any Republicans. Instead of just listening to that, I went forward anyway. And when I made those calls saying, hey, I need your support and here's why, they listened. Some of them still said, well, Tulsi, I've heard you, but I disagree. Maybe next time. Many others said, Tulsi, I've heard you and you make sense. You have my support. The kinds of real conversations, of communication, both talking and listening, thinking of how we put the well-being and the best interests of our country at the forefront, and getting things done as a result. This is what we need in all of our leaders. This is the experience of leadership that I will bring to serve you every day as your president and commander-in-chief. My personal commitment to put the well-being of people ahead of partisanship, ahead of profits, ahead of corporate special interests, and rebuilding these ties with leaders across our government to really bring to fruition that vision that our founders had for us as a nation, where our government is truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. We've got a lot of work to do to get there. But it's not a pie-in-the-sky goal. It is a necessary one. It is a necessary one. When Abraham Lincoln delivered his speech warning the nation over 161 years ago that a house divided against itself cannot stand, he ended that speech by saying, "We shall not fail. We shall not fail." He said, if we stand fast, we shall not fail. And that challenge that he gave at that time rings just as true did then. The answer to bridge these divides in our country doesn't lie in one party or another party. It doesn't lie in one person's hands or another person's hands. The power to change this, to heal these divides, lies in every one of our hands, every one of our hearts. That challenge is there for us because it's our future. This is not my future. Not vote, not make sure their voices are heard because they think that this system is too broken to be fixed. The only way we do fix it is by taking action, and that action begins with casting your vote. And I'll close on this before we open it up to Q&A here, because it's a couple of really president. The only way we win together, the only way we make this change, the only way you get the candidate you want is by making sure your voice is heard and casting your vote for that candidate. Especially here in New Hampshire, where you are proud of how independent this state is, and independent voters are across party lines. You don't let anybody come and tell you how to cast your vote. You don't let anybody to come in here and tell you who should win this election and who should lose. So it's important both for New Hampshire and across the country to remember this fact, that our future lies within our hands, and no matter how much the powerful elite in Washington try to tell us who they think should win or who they think should lose, we get to decide. We get to decide. And the beautiful thing about what is happening here in New Hampshire, we've been campaigning here now for over a year. We've held over 115 town halls all across your state. The beautiful thing here is that the decision that you will make as New Hampshire voters obviously is the wake-up call, a huge message to Washington, that now is the time for real change, for systemic change that goes beyond one party or another party. Systemic change that says we the people, Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and Independents stand together. We stand united, work side by side. And now is the time that we take our government back for us, for our nation, and for our future. Thank you. We've got a couple of microphones here. Yes, sir. We'll start with you in the back.
Hi, Howard Wooldridge, retired police officer and detective from Fort Worth, Texas. 48 years ago, President Nixon declared the war on drugs. 48 years later, and $1.2 trillion, in fact, it's worse now than before. There's heroin, fentanyl, whatever, in every small town in New Hampshire and across the United States. As a cop, I saw this thing to be the most destructive.
Thank you for your service. That's worthy of a round of applause. For all of our law enforcement, thank you. I couldn't agree more that this war on drugs that has shown decade after decade, generation after generation to have been a total failure is unfortunately still continuing. It is not only costing us as taxpayers tremendously at every step of the way in this failed war on drugs, it is costing us as the American people It is ruining people's lives, taking people's lives, tearing families apart, ravaging communities, is immeasurable because it's continuing. The opioid crisis, I was shocked when I heard the statistic. 130 Americans every single day because of the opioid crisis. Every day. These are people who we may know or have worked with or members of our family. 130 Americans every day, and 40% of those started with prescription drugs. Maybe they got a prescription because their back was hurting or they had surgery or they needed something else, but they weren't really warned. Many people not warned about how highly addictive these drugs are, and just saying, it's okay. I met a woman the other day, just a few years ago. She had some serious health issues and they drugged her up good. She's like, is this good for me? They're like, yeah, it's just like Tylenol. Just like Tylenol. Literally, that's what they told her. And she finally got to a place where she realized this is not good for me. It's completely changing who I am as a person, and she felt her life being sucked from her. And thankfully, she was in a place where she was able to get herself out of it and make some decisions. 10 days. It took her 10 days to wean herself off of these opioids because she was able to access medicinal cannabis. That's how she got her treatment. Completely off of these opioids. But not every person in this country is able to do that. Why? Because of this failed war on drugs. She lived in the shadows. She is a conservative Republican woman from Alabama. Her mother was a prosecutor, her father is a physician. And she had to live in the shadows, even though this medicinal cannabis just saved her life because she's a criminal under federal law. Alabama has not legalized even medicinal cannabis. But this is one of many illustrations of the point that you raise, sir. And it's why throughout my time in Congress, I have introduced legislation to, for example, I have the only bipartisan bill that would end the federal marijuana prohibition as the first step towards ending this failed war on drugs. Supported other legislation that would expunge the criminal records of those who have fallen victim and are chained with this criminal record because of this failed war on drugs. And I'm strongly advocating for us as a country, where as president, I would change our priorities where instead of criminalizing people who are struggling with substance abuse and addiction by cycling them through our prisons and our criminal justice system, instead redirect those resources towards actually providing people with help and say, this is a healthcare issue. This is not a criminal issue. We've seen how this has worked in other countries like Portugal, and how ultimately they have seen those numbers and statistics of addiction drastically reducing, and the amount of money that they were spending to pay for these prisons dropping, able to see a benefit across their society as well as a benefit to the fiscal choices that they're making as a country. I think this is an issue that we should be raising more and discussing more across the country to really focus on the facts and the consequences of our previous policies and where we need to go. Thank you.
Good evening, Congresswoman. I'm Steve Valet from Dover, and you've been getting a lot of accolades from libertarians, so I'm going to ask you a question that will put that to the test. Suppose somebody decides to move to a country like Switzerland that has lower taxes. As you may be aware, in order for them to get the tax benefit, they would need to renounce their U.S. citizenship, and there is a fee to do that, which is currently $2,350.
Just to renounce citizenship?
Yes. So two questions for you. One, do you think that fee is reasonable? And second, how do you feel about the Reid Amendment, which, if enforced, would prohibit that person from re-entering the United States, even to visit family?
Thank you for your question. I'm not familiar with the Reid Amendment, so I can't comment on that. I will definitely look at it, so I am familiar with it. It seems like an exorbitant amount of money, but it's all kind of one of the underlying issues there is how the United States, what's the word I'm looking for with our tax laws now? The United States is one of the only countries, thank you, citizenship-based taxation versus, exactly, we're the only major country that does that. So that's something that I would, kind of go deeper. It's a big deal to renounce your citizenship. So let's get to kind of the root cause of this challenge, why someone may find themselves in that position of having to make that choice. And so that's something that I'm looking at, how we can make it so that it's a more fair system while preventing the unintended consequences that we've seen in some other countries where people use this as an excuse to export money and not pay taxes here at home. Thank you. Somebody on this side?
Prescription drugs.
Yes.
The cost of prescription drugs, how can we bring it down, and can Americans buy drugs from countries that sell it cheaper than we do?
We should be able to, like Canada, right down the street. It's not that far away. The rising cost of prescription drugs in this country is out of control. And we as Americans are being price gouged by big pharma with almost no limitation whatsoever. I think one of the most egregious examples of this is insulin. I can tell you I've heard from big pharma lobbyists in Washington before who say, everyone wants us to bring down the cost of prescription drugs, but it costs a lot of money to develop these drugs in the first place, to go through the R&D and develop this and pay all the scientists and people who are actually coming up with these drugs. But if you look at insulin, a total of $3. But how much is insulin, how much is a vial of insulin now, here, in the United States? It's, girl in high school came and told me the other day her little sister has juvenile diabetes, $360 a vial. For one vial. I was at Concord High School, and we had a kind of a town hall there with about 450 students, and she says, what is going to happen to my sister who will die without her insulin if when she turns 26, she doesn't have a good enough job that will give her good health insurance, and she can't afford $360 per vial for insulin? We've got to rein in this price gap, big pharma. So, check. All right, we'll roll with it. There goes the quartermaster. All right, they're gonna figure it out. I'm gonna use my military voice here. Carry it out.